Thanks, Dave. It's good chatting with you again.
Hey, thanks for being here. And I just wanted to start off with the crypto market where we saw Bitcoin, being pushed up. I mean, it was just running like crazy where people were just getting in. A lot of people were selling gold, silver, or moving away from gold and silver. And then all of a sudden, the crypto market crashed. We know that Mt. Gox and certain others were selling a huge amount of cryptocurrency. And now we're in a phase where gold and silver, they're holding steady. They're moving up a little bit. Do you think Bitcoin is digital gold? Do you think that people are now confused on where to put their money? What is happening in the market?
Well, like anything that's going up, people will chase it, and I think that's what happened to the cryptocurrencies. There was, a lot of hype around it, and a lot of people thinking it was going to be, the new currency, replacing fiat currencies and potentially even, replacing gold. You use the phrase digital gold, which, obviously the pundits of cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin started to use that term, as just part of the hype. But, the future of the cryptocurrencies, I have really little opinion about. I don't, I'm exposed. I never did buy any Bitcoin or any of the other cryptocurrencies. Actually, I did buy a small position in a European cryptocurrency, which still not tradable yet. But I do have some exposure in Hive, which is really my only tradable exposure in the space. But it's interesting, space. Obviously, there's a lot of energy behind it. There's a lot of hype as well, which does concern me a little bit. But it's very similar to the tech bubble of 1999, 2000, 2001, where there was a lot of hype around on the internet, and at that point, people really didn't know what the internet was going to turn into. And lo and behold, there's some of the biggest companies in the world were actually formed around that time. There was many bankruptcies and many business failures, of course, but a few companies did come out and are today, obviously very, very large companies. So, the verdict's out on the direction or what's going to happen with the cryptocurrencies. But, I'm a miner. I'm always going to have gold in my portfolio.
Now, speaking about gold, we know that Russia is accumulating a huge amount of gold. Same thing with China. And there are many different countries that are repatriating their gold. Germany, Venezuela, and many other countries. Now, Turkey is asking for its gold back. And we're starting to see this trend where countries are saying, something, we would like to hold our gold. Actually, Russia came out and said that, we hold all our gold. We have none of our gold with the U.S., so they can't touch it. I mean, is this a signal right now to purchase gold and silver or mining stocks?
Well, I don't like buying gold or silver for geopolitical reasons. The tensions around the world, of course, are a concern to probably everyone listening, including myself. I don't like to see the political tension that we're seeing between some pretty big nations around the planet. And then I think that, the central banks, as a result of the tension that has been building over the last couple of years, I think these central banks are asking for their gold back, and there's several countries that have done it, not just Turkey, and that phenomenon or that trend will probably continue. And as long as the geopolitical situation continually heats up as it is, it doesn't seem to want to end anytime soon. It's in the best interest, as far as I'm concerned, for each government to have their own gold in their backyard, just in case they have a run on their currency or they need to do whatever they need to do to protect their economies. And, Russia is doing, exactly that, as well as China and several other countries. So, but quite honestly, I'd rather buy gold and silver for the pure fundamentals of the metal. The debt levels around the world are so high that, gold is, as far as I'm concerned, going to be part of the reset that's going to be coming over the next several years. And how that looks, only, maybe God knows, but the work that some economists are doing in this area are quite interesting. But and also in the case of silver, the supply demand fundamentals of silver are quite phenomenal. And I'm proud of being a CEO of a silver company because I'm very optimistic about the future price of silver.
Now, you mentioned two things, debt and a reset. Now, first, I want to look at debt here because the IMF, the BIS, they are warning developed countries that there's way too much debt in the system right now, and governments need to cut back, and they're talking about the developed nations, which really means austerity for the people. And do you think it's possible for countries to slow down the amount of debt that is being added to the system? Or do we have to have a debt jubilee? Do we need, and you mentioned the word reset, or do we need to reset the system because it's completely out of control right now?
Well, look, the governments have got themselves into this situation, and they're trying to figure it out. And I guess the current view is they continually print money, and maybe the economy will get so strong that it'll erase the debts, or maybe inflation will wipe out the debts. I'm not exactly sure what's in their minds, but I'm of the view that we need gold at much higher gold prices in order to have that reset, because we can't reset the world financial system at the current gold price.
What is the gold price be to have a reset?
Well, look, there's lots of people out there that are throwing numbers around, and if you look at the total world debt and the total amount of gold, based on what I have seen, it's around $10,000.
So gold would have to be around $10,000 per ounce. China and Russia, they're purchasing a huge amount of gold, over a very specific period of time here, and they're ramping it up. Do you think that gold will be reevaluated, and they're buying it very cheap right now because they understand that once it's reevaluated, they'll be able to use gold as a confidence booster? Yeah,
look, I follow Jim Rickards, and I think that his work is probably some of the best work out there, and he's expecting to see the central banks reprice gold at a much higher level in order to get off the debt. I'm of the same view. I don't see any way of doing it, except unfortunately the only other way would be a war, and hopefully we don't get to that point.
Do you think miners right now, do you think they're going to have a comeback? Because we can see that Russia and China and other countries are asking for gold back or buying their gold. Do you think miners now, because of all what's going on here, they're going to have a comeback?
Well, they've already started to have a comeback. Look at First Majestic, which I'm the CEO of, or it's double what it was a couple of years ago. It's off its highs, obviously. It had a big run in 2016, when silver prices broke out and gold broke out as well. And unfortunately, since the summer of 2016, we had a bit of a correction. But since that correction is now bottomed in late last year, it's now starting to pick up again. So I quite like the action in the mining sector. I think it's a great time to be looking for good quality mining companies, focused on gold and silver.
Now, in regards to your company, I understand that your team actually built a list of 100 assets, both in private hands and publicly traded, and you sifted through them. Could you detail this process?
Well, sure. You're referring to First Mining Finance, or recently renamed First Mining Gold. It's very similar to what I've done, throughout my career. When I put together, my first company, First Quantum, or when I put together First Majestic Silver in 2002, and then First Mining in 2015. It's buying assets at the low cyclical part of the cycle, because in the mining sector is very cyclical. It does go through booms and busts, and if you buy it at the top, you could get quite hurt, unfortunately. And if you buy them at the bottom, which I think we're now off that bottom, you can do quite well. So I put together, in the case of my three companies that I formed, assets at the bottom of the markets, as I've said. And, in the case of First Majestic Silver, one of the best, portfolios of silver mines in Mexico. In the case of First Mining, gold, one of the best portfolios of gold assets in Eastern Canada, in some of the best mining jurisdictions in the world. And, I'm pretty proud with what First Mining's accomplished. They've got 25 assets, of which, 5 of them are what I think will be producing mines within the next 10 years. And right now they're developing those assets, which of course take time, but eventually First Mining will become a producing gold company.
Now, back in November of 2015, First Mining completed the acquisition of Gold Canyon Resources, which wholly owned the Springpole Gold Project. Now, Springpole is one of Canada's largest undeveloped gold projects. How long before you can safely estimate Springpole will be in production?
Well, there's a lot of things that have to happen before spring pulls in production. I'd hate to put a date on that just because it would be too speculative to do that. This is one of the largest undeveloped gold projects in Canada. It's one of the largest gold projects, undeveloped gold projects in the world. There's a project that's got 5 million ounces of gold in the ground. It'll be, according to the preliminary economic assessment, it'll be a 300,000 ounce producer over 11 or 12 years, with the cost per ounce, I forget exactly what it is, but around $700 an ounce, with an internal rate of return of over 25%. So, these are pretty attractive numbers. But of course, you've got to get over, all the permitting hurdles. And if your listeners want to go look at some of the news releases that just went out, there's quite a good news release that went out yesterday. They're following the permitting path, and they just need to keep doing that. And of course, you get all the stakeholders on side and get the governments and the local people on side, and then eventually get all the permits in place, and then build, quite a large mill. The throughput they're planning on doing is a little bit over 30,000 tons per day. So it's a big mine, and it's going to take time to build it. But it's a process, and we're pretty excited about it. And we're very excited, obviously, about having such a large asset in our portfolio. The net present value of that project is I think around 3 or 4 times larger than the current market cap of the entire company.
Is gold production peaking right now?
I get asked that question. And I think you could look at the supply demand fundamentals of the metal, and also the cyclicality of the metal industry, because the mining sector goes through boom and bust, and we get when there's prices are low, as they are currently, there's little investment going on in the mining sector. For example, First Mining has just been able to start developing these projects whereby the predecessor companies that First Mining acquired, they acquired 8 companies over a 15-month period starting in April of 2015 to the summer of 2016 at pretty low prices. And then today you couldn't do that just because, well, 2 things. The assets just aren't simply available anymore, but the prices of those assets would just be much too difficult to buy in the current environment, because the environment is much better than it was back in 2014 or 2015. But my point of that discussion or comment is the fact that you couldn't raise money to develop a project back then. The market's getting better, whereby you can actually start raising money for projects. The metals aren't too bad. We have $3 copper, we've got $1.40 zinc, we've got $17 silver, $13.50 gold. The $17 silver happens to be the worst performing metal out of the group I just mentioned, but the metal prices are okay, and then the mining sector is making reasonable margins at this point in the cycle. I am expecting higher metal prices over the next couple of years, so margins will increase, and as margins increase, the investments increase. So as investments increase, of course, production increases. So production is more related to the investment and where you are in the cycle. So I wouldn't quite say that we're at peak gold or for that matter, any peak metal, because, in a $5,000 gold environment, I would think that there would be, a lot of miners pretty active looking for gold. I think the question you should be asking is, what would the supply demand fundamentals at $5,000 gold be? And what would support $5,000 gold? And you can ask the same question about what would support $150 silver, because that's where I think it's going. So I could answer those questions because I think that's really the crux of the go forward in the metal sector.
Now, there was a bill that was introduced into Congress, and this could be a game changer for gold, for the miners, and everything else. This is coming from West Virginia Congressman Alex Mooney. He submitted the Gold Standard Bill, which is legislation H.R. 5404, and this would define the U.S. dollar as a fixed amount of gold. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to stabilize the monetary system while protecting savers, workers, and investors from inflation. And what's very interesting about all this is that The Economist magazine also had the date of 2018 when we moved to a gold standard. So we have this bill that's being introduced. We had The Economist magazine, which was kind of predicting that we were moving to this gold standard. I mean, do you think if this actually makes it through, is this going to be a game changer?
Well, this kind of falls into my earlier comment about what's going to support, an environment where we have, $5,000 gold. And that's exactly what could do it, because, if there's no way, as I said earlier, that we could pay off the national debts of all the governments around the world at 1350 gold. That's just simply not going to happen. There's just simply not enough gold on the planet to support the debt loads that the governments have. So you need a much, much higher gold price. So in fact, if a bill like that did pass, it would have to be in conjunction with some type of repricing, in my view anyways, of the gold price, which of course, if the gold price is reset, of course, the silver price and other metals would likely be reset as well. So, that could very well be the future, and it could be the solution that we need to reset the world financial system.
Now, according to the company's presentation, that in terms of your peer comparison, you are 71% below the average in terms of enterprise value divided by ounces in the gold. What needs to change for the market to revert First Mining Gold to the mean, which isn't a small change either? It represents about 350% move to the upside.
Well, look, it's stock prices move, with sentiment primarily. Of course, there's underlying factors, like in the mining sector, you're referring to First Mining Gold. So in the gold sector, higher gold prices obviously would have an impact on the share price. But, more importantly, because, the gold price does move around year after year, is basically the fundamentals of the business itself. And then, there you've got a company with 25 assets in its portfolio, and then that's a lot of assets for any company to manage. And then, so they're focusing on the top level assets. Of course, Springpole, you mentioned already, and Goldland and Hope Brook and Cameron and Pickle Crow are the assets that are really getting the most companies' attention. But there's limited time, there's limited people, there's limited money, and it just simply takes time to advance projects. These are big projects in Northern Ontario that take multi years to develop into major assets, which the market will then start to value. Right now the market looks at the assets, and of course the market, I think, from what I hear, is very much interested in the company, but at the same time, the company has to advance the assets in order to get the analysts and get the institutions involved in the company, and that just simply takes time to do.
Do you still think that the precious metals market, do you think it's still being manipulated, suppressed?
Well, of course, it's not just the precious metals market. There's many people, not just myself, on record stating that the markets are manipulated. We saw just in February where we saw multi-thousand point down days of the Dow Jones, and the S&P broke down and the Nasdaq broke down, and these are fairly major moves in quite a short period of time, and now the markets aren't quite exactly back to where they were, but the markets are back substantially. I see today they're down again today quite badly, but nevertheless, I think that the governments have an interest in keeping the markets as buoyant as possible, and I think they do that. I think the governments are on record now and then from stating that they are in the markets, assisting in buoying up the markets or maintaining some stability in the marketplace. And they feel that if they do that, I gather, I'm not in the government, but I would gather they think that that creates stability in the workforce and within corporations, and it's good for the economy and so on and so forth. You can have a debate about that all you want. I don't agree with that particular strategy that the central banks use, but they do it, and it's a part of our financial system. And whether that changes tomorrow or a year from now or never changes at all, who knows? But it is what it is, and it's just part of our financial system, as I said.
Why are the central banks so worried about gold and silver? I mean, why do they have to suppress it?
Well, because they want to keep the equity markets up, and because equity markets have a direct relationship to taxes. So, if you look at long-term charts and put tax revenues up against the Dow Jones, the S&P, there's a direct relationship between taxes coming into the government coffers and where the stock markets are. If the stock markets are low and no one's investing, then no one's making capital gains, and the population is not spending money or not making money. So it's in the best interest of the governments to keep the markets up as high as possible and keep people invested as much as possible, and keep the taxes coming in the door. And then gold, in their view, I gather, is the contrary trade to the big markets, which I don't necessarily agree with, but that some people within the central banks that manage currencies, the U.S. dollar or the fiat system, think that gold is somehow counterintuitive to the fiat system. I don't think it has to be that way. But for whatever reason, I think the central banks view it that way.
Can you just briefly talk about First Quantum Minerals in terms of what the shareholders gained under your tenure? And the same with First Majestic.
Well, First Quantum was a long time ago. I'd have to go back and look at a stock chart on First Quantum. But, I founded the company in 1992, and we had our first assets coming in the door in 1994. We bought the core asset in 95. We started raising money and developing the asset in 97, 98, and then the market started getting quite difficult at that time. We had a very, very bad bear market in the mining sector from 1998 to 2002, but we're still able to raise sufficient capital and get that mine up and running. We actually started producing in 1998. I left the company in 2000 at quite a low share price. The stock went from pennies to over $6 a share, and then it corrected all the way down to less than $1. And I left and First Majestic after that, and the company went on and just continued to do what was set. The path that was set, when I was there, and they developed the assets very well, and the company did extremely well. And I think it was 2006 or 2008, I forget exactly the year, but the stock hit $140 a share, which was pretty phenomenal, being such a pure copper company. It's today even one of the purest copper companies on the planet. So we're a very good management team and one of the best copper companies there is on the planet, with a market cap of somewhere around, I don't know, $6 or $8 billion or something. But anyways, I put First Majestic together in 2002, similar strategy, focused on one part of the world. They were focusing on the copper belt in Africa. I focused First Majestic on just Mexico and focused on silver. I still, to this day, believe that every portfolio should contain copper and silver, because I think copper and silver are the two most important industrial metals on the planet, and you should have exposure to both of those metals. So that's why I put First Majestic together. And in 2002, I started putting together the money, and then 2004 we bought our first asset, and by 2006 we had 4 mines in our portfolio. By 2010, we hit 10 million ounces of production. I think it was 2010. The share price, obviously, by 2011 hit $25 a share. And since, that's, obviously when silver prices were running, and silver price and the rest of the market, corrected. And, obviously the stock came off from those levels, and, it is where it is today. We've got 4,000 employees. We have about 13 million ounces 16 million ounces of silver production this year. That's equivalent silver production. And we're just in the process of buying our 7th mine, which will add another approximately 10 million ounces of production, which will become our largest mine in our portfolio, of which we'll have 7 silver mines, all located in Mexico. and of course being the second largest silver producer in Mexico.
Now you mentioned Jim Rickards just before, and there's many other people that are giving different prices of gold and silver that they're going to eventually break out, and people have been waiting for quite a while for this breakout. When do you think gold and silver will finally break out and move in the direction that everyone wants it to move?
Well, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I, as a CEO of First Mining, or pardon me, CEO of First Majestic and the chairman of First Mining, I can't really worry about when that's going to happen. We have to, from an operating point of view, First Majestic's point of view, we have to focus on costs and profitability, and try to make sure that we're producing profitable ounces, and we're trying to, and at the same time trying to build a business, which we are obviously are working on doing on a regular basis. In the case of First Mining Gold, it has to focus on developing the assets as best as it can in a relatively low share price environment. So it's got to be nimble, and it's got to be very clever and precise and strategic in every step that it makes along the way. And fortunately, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I am the chairman of First Mining, so I'm there, stick handling, the daily activities that go on. But there's a very good management team led by Jeff Swernoga, who's the CEO, ex Torex, ex Barrick individual. He's a great guy, good operator, and he's looking forward to turning First Mining, which is currently a development company, ultimately into a producing mine, a producing asset, or a producing a company, a gold company, and I'm there to assist them along the way.
So what's coming up for you guys? Any milestones, upcoming milestones, any news releases? What do you guys have coming up?
Well, in the case of First Mining, look for more results on Goldland. They're continually drilling this year. Look for advances on Springpole on the permitting side, and the other assets, of course. They're looking at doing some work late in the year. With the portfolio the size of it is, there is some efforts as well to look for partners in some of the non-core assets, primarily the Mexican or U.S. portfolio. And then look for news on that. In the case of First Majestic Silver, we'll be closing our seventh mine acquisition here in the next couple of weeks. So look for that, and then of course look for the financial statements throughout the year as the company develops this other mine.
Keith, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people get in touch with your companies and see all your information?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Keith_Neumeyer. I don't do a lot there, but I am there occasionally tweeting stuff out that may be of interest to your listeners. But of course, First Mining Gold has its website, and First Majestic Silver, of course, it has its website. There's lots of information on both their websites, and an interview like this, it's hard to talk in too much detail. But I threw some stuff out on Springpole and some things out on First Majestic. But people should go to the websites, look at the presentations, look at the PowerPoint presentations that are both on the home pages of both those companies' websites to look for updated information. The PowerPoints are updated monthly with the latest information, and people should do their own due diligence and before they make any decisions.